Josh, the information we're covering on today's show is so profound and so important. We're going to send this direct to some decision makers. And why do you feel like it is so important for the governors, lieutenant governors, and elected officials for them to know that these PCR tests are absolutely worthless, that the very tests that everybody is encouraged to take to test for COVID-19, that these tests are in fact completely worthless?
Because the facts absolutely prove that we should be 100% open.
James, you're an attorney. Why do you think that every elected official, anybody out there with a decision-making ability, anybody out there with the capacity to make change, why do you think they need to hear today's show and today's interview with David Rasnick, the PhD?
Because they need to make decisions based on the truth, not based on lies from people who have an ulterior motive.
If you're out there and you happen to be a lieutenant governor or mayor, this show is for you.
Get ready to enter the Thrive Time Show.
We started from the bottom, now we here. We started from the bottom and we'll show you how to get here. Started from the bottom, now we here. We started from the bottom, now we here.
We started from the bottom, now we're on the top, teaching you the systems to get what we got. Colton Dixon's on the hooks, I break down the books. Z's bringing some wisdom and the good looks. As the father of five, that's why I'm a dive. So if you see my wife and kids, please tell them hi. It's the C&Z up on your radio. And now 3, 2, 1, here we go.
We started from the bottom, now we here. We started from the bottom and we'll show you how to get here.
Yes, 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 and yes, Thrive Nation, I've got nothing but good news for you today. James, you're an attorney. You have moved here from the great state of New York.
I'm a muted attorney. Oh, no, I'm an unmuted attorney.
You're an attorney. You've moved here from New York. You recently had your mic unmuted by me.
Thank you.
Why did you move here from New York? I mean, tell us, what are the conditions on the ground in New York City at this point?
Yeah, well, there were two components to the move here. The first was repelling, and the second was attraction. So you had asked me to come several dozen times, and that was a big component to it. And then in terms of repelling, my interpretation and impression and experience in Manhattan was deteriorating because the city was in a lot of pain. The restaurants were closed, the businesses were shuttered, the people were moving out. And I'm not sure if it's getting any better. I hear that the restaurants and bars are opening either tomorrow or October 1st. But that doesn't really repair what's going on that I'm hearing from clients. I have one client that's in a building of about 700 people. They have about 40 or 50 that work in their office. Only about 10 or 20 show up now. And in the whole building, there's about less than 50 or about 50 that are coming into the office every day. So attendance is down by, 90% or more.
You were kind of depressing there for a minute. I feel like you were kind of negative there. So I'm going to hit the move button. Don't give us facts.
Well, I'm used to that as being an attorney.
Now listen here. This guy on today's show, we have a guest who says this. He says, if we outlawed PCR tests, the COVID-19 PCR tests, then the COVID pandemic would be done tomorrow. If we just outlawed the test. And I'm thinking, that's a pretty deep thought. So I thought, this guy's got to be crazy. So I look him up, and I look up people that have talked to him in the past. I've looked up all of his research. Turns out this guy, David Rasnick, is a PhD, and he knows his stuff. David Rasnick, welcome on to the Thrive Time Show. How are you, sir?
Well, I'm fine. I'm glad to be with you.
Hey, let's start off by attempting to discredit you. That way we can get some really good rapport going here. Where'd you go to school?
Georgia Tech. I graduated with a PhD in 1978. I also have BS degrees in biology and chemistry.
And how long did you have to go to school to earn those degrees?
Oh, Lord. Let's see. I guess I was in, 4. Well, I got 3 college degrees. I haven't added them up.
How do you make your money? Like, what's your career? What do you do for a living?
Well, I worked for 20 years in the pharmaceutical biotech industry, and I even had my own companies, a series of little biotech companies in the 80s and in the 90s. And I got out of that business in 1996 when I was fed up with the whole industry. It's just a horrible scam.
What I'm going to do is I'm going to keep the energy up pretty high. I'm going to keep the speed up pretty fast. And we're going to pepper you with questions about these PCR tests, okay? First off, what is a PCR test?
PCR stands for polymerase chain reaction. My friend Kerry Mullis invented it in 1983, and he got the Nobel Prize in 1993 for the invention. It basically is a way to amplify teeny tiny traces of genetic material into a carload of stuff. It was meant for commercial purposes to produce proteins and things for biotech. It was never intended to be used as a test for any infectious agent at all.
PCR tests. Why does Dr. Birx, why does Dr. Fauci, why do blue state governors seem to be obsessed with PCR tests?
Well, if it weren't for the PCR tests, they would have no way of calculating these cases, I put that in quotes, of COVID, because the CDC itself says that COVID-19 and flu, they have identically the same symptoms and complications. For example, the symptoms are fever, diarrhea, vomiting, fatigue, muscles, so on and so forth. Complications, pneumonia, respiratory failure, acute respiratory distress syndrome, heart attack, stroke, and so on they go. The lists are identical. So how in the world do you then distinguish between COVID-19 and the flu? The only way is to have a test that comes out positive, and you call the test a PCR test for COVID-19. That's the only way. Now the problem is that since the 1990s, that's when the PCR tests were first developed for HIV, and since then for other viruses around, other politically significant or substantial viruses, because it allows people erroneously to claim that they can detect a virus, a functioning infectious virus in a person by amplifying trace amounts of viral RNA or segments of RNA. But these tests have never been validated against the actual virus themselves in people. To this day, that is the case. And I'm not the only one saying that. A number of people have brought that up. Jessica Watson stated last May in British Medical Journal, tests need to be evaluated to determine their sensitivity and specificity, ideally by comparison with a gold standard. The gold standard in this case is the virus. The lack of such a clear-cut gold standard for COVID-19 testing makes evaluation of the test accuracy challenging. In plain language, there's no way to know what a positive or negative PCR result means. And if you get rid of that, all you've got left is the flu.
What do you think is a more what do you think is more real and more trustworthy, R2D2 or a PCR test?
R2D2.
Okay, just was curious. I've always wanted to ask that question. Now, I'm going to send this show directly to a lieutenant governor today. Not going to mention which one. I'm going to send it to them as soon as we finish this. It's going to this person. And imagine you had an audience right now with a governor, lieutenant governor. By the way, Tennessee just opened. By the way, Florida just opened. By the way, America is reopening. But if you're sitting there right now with the lieutenant governor, and you could talk to him and explain to him why he should stop, why we should stop using PCR tests, what would be your argument for doing so?
Well, the first thing is these PCR tests they're called surrogate markers. They stand in for the thing itself. And let me give you a good example of what a surrogate marker is. Let's say somebody walks in with 100 license plates in a bucket. And you would want to know, are these license plates, do they come from functioning automobiles or trucks or anything? You can't, it would be wrong to assume that by looking at that license plate, you knew what vehicle it was coming from, you knew what condition it was in. You know, for example, if they came from a used car lot, it'd be a good assumption that probably most of those cars that correspond with the license plates, you could put in the key in the ignition, crank it up, drive it on the lot, off the lot. If they came from a junkyard, you could expect a zero correlation. And until you've done that correlation, put the key in the ignition and cranked it up and see if you could drive it off the lot, see if there's actually a real bona fide virus that could infect cells and cause disease, you have no way of knowing what that surrogate marker test is.
Do you believe that we should be, again, if you're talking to the lieutenant governor right now, a lieutenant governor, would you think that he should be trusting Dr. Fauci?
Oh, Lord, no. I've known about Fauci since the mid-1980s. He started, in fact, Fauci started at the NIAID the same year that the government declared that AIDS was contagious, sexually transmitted, caused by a virus, later called HIV. There was never any scientific publication prior to April 23rd, 1984, at a press conference that any scientist could go to and read anything about this virus. It was declared at a press conference, and that was it, and it remains government policy to this day. Ever since then, we've had the SARS, the MERS, the swine flu, H1N1, and now COVID, that are all based on the same just plain declaration that we've got based on these tests, PCR tests, for example. Every one of them has a PCR test. And not a single one of those PCR tests has been validated by comparison with the virus that is supposed to be testing in a human being.
Now, talk to me about this. Dr. Richard Bartlett, a good friend of mine, Dr. Richard Bartlett, the former top medical advisor for the Texas Governor Perry for 7 consecutive years. He's been treating anybody that has COVID-19 with COVID-19-like symptoms. He's been treating these people who test positive for COVID-19 with budesonide, also known as Pulmicort, and a Z-Pak. And nobody's died at all. Nobody's died. Are people actually dying from this? Because that always is the argument that people go back to is, well, Clay, people really did die. You got to take it seriously. What would you say to that? When people say, well, you got to take it seriously, people really are dying.
I mean, that's the key that I always tell everybody. You don't have to be a scientist. All you got to do, one thing for sure, you can't make up dead bodies. You can count them. And I keep asking people, where are they? And you look at the data, the statistics, and the mortality around the world is no different, certainly in the United States or any other place, from a seasonal flu. People are always dying. Millions of people, are dying all the time. So sure, you can just say, well, they died from this or they died from that. Just because they died, you can put any label you want. In fact, we've had a friend that died of cancer, cervical cancer, and they called her a COVID death. If you're just close to somebody, if you're physically just was near somebody that tested positive for this, then you can be assumed to have been exposed, and you can even be assumed to be a COVID case yourself. A case is just somebody that is declared COVID infected.
So here's I have one more question for you, and then I'm going to tee it up for Josh Wilson, who's a business owner, and for James, here's an attorney, and he's based in Manhattan. He moved here to Oklahoma, so you have an attorney, you have a owner of an irrigation company. I think we represent the average Americans here. We have questions for you. My final question for you is, what's the motive? What's the motive for this virus? What's the motive then for all the media hype about the virus? What's the motive for the PCR test? What's the motives for the quarantines, the shutdowns, the lockdowns, the mask mandates? What's the motive?
Well, ultimately, it serves the same purpose of World War I, World War II. It's for the destruction of Western society so that it can be rebuilt according to somebody else why they wanted to build it. The PCR test performs 4 functions. It produces ever-increasing cases of contrived COVID-19 pandemic. That's number 1. It also collects an individual's DNA to be added to government databases, regardless of the test results. That was released just a week or so ago, that the government includes that test data, your own human DNA, into their database. It also includes an individual's particulars for contact tracing, which leads to a big brother society. And it also prepares children to accept enslavement as normal. This is a crime against humanity. If we outlaw the PCR test, COVID pandemic vanishes overnight.
I don't know if it's too early or not, but would you recommend if someone wants you to take a PCR test, would you recommend that you give them fecal matter from someone you know and see what happens? Would you recommend, is that the best kind of COVID PCR test prank we could do right now? Or if someone has to take one at work, what do you recommend they do?
Well, did you hear that story about the fellow, I forget which country it was, it might have been Kenya?
Tanzania?
That sent a papaya.
Yeah, it's Tanzania.
And a goat.
Other DNA, tested positive.
That guy's great.
For the PCR test. No, nobody should take these tests. I'm serious about this. I will never take one of these tests. My wife won't take any of these tests. These tests are horrible, horrible, horrible. If we give into this stuff, we're in the beginning stages of World War III right now. Literally, we're the preparatory stages, like between Nazi Germany, between the wars. That's exactly where we are right now.
Okay, so Josh, what questions would you have? You're an American, you're a father, you're a husband. What do you got?
So, David, I guess my big, glaring thing is so every doctor I hear, besides the crazy one. Anyway, so scientifically, let me say every doctor, because obviously there's Birx and Fauci in them, but scientifically, it doesn't seem to me that any of this adds up. So for us common folks out here, us business owners, our regular Americans, the silent majority, as they say, how can we begin to to shift this? How can we begin to
What can we
get
do?
the word out to say, hey, these PCR tests are crap? Like, what do we do, David?
Well, we have to practice what we preach. We claim to be Americans, land of the free and home of the brave and all that. We are the people. We have to take charge. We have to exercise our liberties. Liberties are not something you have, they are something you exercise. And if you don't exercise them, you don't have them. So we have to do that.
Don't wear a mask.
Wearing these masks, these god-awful masks.
Quit getting tested.
The masks are a symbol of submission.
Yes.
It's like, okay, we can do any idiotic thing you tell us to do. That's basically what the masks are. The 6-foot separation is also idiotic. Shutting down the society. I heard there was a few days ago, 60 million Americans have lost their job this year. 60 million Americans.
Unbelievable.
You know, I mean, hundreds of thousands of companies are out of business. Who knows how many of them are going to be permanently out of business? You do not have to be a scientist to know that something's really screwy here. You know,
Trump
You don't
was
need to talk
deceived.
to a scientist.
Trump was deceived.
Yes.
And he was awakened to the jackassery of what was occurring. That's why he put Dr. Scott Atlas now as the White House coronavirus task force leader, because Dr. Scott Atlas from Stanford, the medical doctor, if what he is saying is true, then Fauci is a liar. Bottom line, the two...
Fauci is a liar.
Fauci is a liar.
Birx is a liar.
Birx is a liar. There it is.
I've known Fauci was a liar since 1984.
What a weasel. Okay, so now I said what a weasel. I wasn't referring to you. I was referring to Fauci. Fauci's a weasel. I just want to get that out there. James, now that I've almost insinuated that my guest was a weasel, help me save the show. I almost crash landed the plane here. Just to be clear, Fauci's the weasel. You're a great American. James, what's the final question you would have here?
All right, it's a 1-2 question.
1-2.
The first part of it is, just the background here. I've lost in terms of support, or at least friendships and colleagues and professional colleagues and stuff like that, because of my views on this, which I share your view and Clay's view, and I think everybody in this room's view.
The truth.
What's the truth? What's the consensus among your circle, both professional doctors, medical people, scientists, and all that? And the second part of the question, which is completely unrelated, but I wanted to ask it because I think it'd be helpful. What level of interest do you have in? Well, so here, let me just give
question
you
one
thing.
was what? Just wait, question one was
question one was, what is it like in your circle of friends, of colleagues, of family members, and things like that? And the second part is,
let's go with question one first, real quick. I just want to make sure, because 2-part questions cause the human brain to explode, even for a PhD. So let's go with part one. What's your answer to part one?
Okay, I tell you that the people I know, the scientists that I've known for decades, and they're all over the world. They're in Europe and Asia and Latin America and the United States. We're all of the same mind. This is hogwash. And the thing that's very, very interesting is, until Scott Atlas was in public on the TV screens and things, all we had were two people, Anthony Fauci and Birx, basically, and then that co-conspirator at the WHO, and they're it. And think of it, there's hundreds of thousands of scientists in the world. Where's the debate? One of the things about science is debate questions. And there are the average person should understand, if they only see 2 or 3 voices on the media all the time, something's seriously wrong, especially among scientists.
Hey, real quick, if you're listening to the show and you respect in any way, shape, or form the opinions and comments of any way, shape, or form of Chris Cuomo or Whoopi Goldberg, may God have mercy on your soul. Okay, so now, James, final question here. Final question. What's your final question, sir?
Well, I appreciate that, Clay. As you may or may not know, Clay and I and a few others filed a lawsuit against the city of Tulsa, the mayor of Tulsa, the
king of
director
Tulsa.
health. Yeah. And then as a result of that, some families and businesses contacted me from Wichita, Kansas, and they also want to do the same thing in Wichita.
Filing lawsuits against the mask mandates.
Against the mask mandates and against the lockdowns and to reopen America.
Yep.
And so what level of interest do you have, if any, in helping us with that effort, whether it be filing an affidavit or signing an affidavit or coming to testify?
That's kind of a hard ask. Wow.
Yeah,
okay. Wow.
It's like live. He's asking live.
I have been an expert witness in about 50 cases. Most of them were felonies, a handful of civil cases with HIV stuff. And I would love to be an expert witness.
Come on.
And
Oh, perfect. Here we go.
on this stuff.
There we go.
I'm already working with some lawyers up in New Jersey and around the country, and even one here in North Carolina where I live. So, no, man, I will do it. If you want an expert witness, you got one.
David, I'm going
And I
to
can get some more.
David, I'm going to go ahead right now. I'm going to get this show edited and get this over to some leaders who can make decisions. And I want to keep the show nice and short because I want to make sure they can get to the end of the show and get all the facts. Everything you've said on today's show is cited. And you cited, I mean, it's like a research paper on steroids. I mean, the level of research he's done here on these show notes is profound. So I encourage anybody listening to this who has the leadership ability, the authority to make change, look up his sources. It's incredible. David, thank you so much for being on today's show.
Happy to do it. Hope to see you guys again.
All right. Take care, brother.
And let's go Oklahoma.
Amen. Let's do it.
Open up.
Open up, baby. Take care, David. Have a great night.
Yeah, we'll see you. Thank you.
And now, without any further ado, 3, 2,